Hello! Welcome everyone to another edition of Online Tips. I'm Lindsay Mason, the Director of Faculty Services, and today I want to focus on exam security. What does that mean? It may mean in the short term, just a few settings added to existing exams that are taken in the quizzes functionality in PantherLearn, and adding those settings so that students are less likely to be able to collaborate while taking the exam, and also maybe to discourage looking up answers rather than just knowing the answers. On the other hand, I also want to look to the future a little bit and think about how you might design assessments that might de-incentivize students cheating on exams. Let's get started. The source for much of the content today comes from a paper titled Thwarting Online Exam Cheating Without Proctor Supervision from the Journal of Academic and Business Ethics in 2019, written by the following authors. Common questions that faculty have when thinking about conducting exams online include: how do we ensure the integrity of a student's grade? How do we know that students are not completing individual exams as collaborative teams? And how do we know that students are not completing exams by illicitly using test banks or solution manuals? Let's think first about how students commonly cheat today. Students may obtain test questions and/or answers before taking the exam through a friend in the current class, a friend in a previous class, or student groups that keep exams on file. Students may also illicitly obtain publishers' test banks and solution manuals. They may also browse or search for answers in notes, an ebook, or on the web while taking the exam. Friends may take the exam at the same time, helping each other. Maybe they have the exams open on their laptops, but they're FaceTiming in a group on their phones, and they're taking the exams together. Or students may report quote-unquote computer issues when they don't actually experience those computer issues, and then ask to reopen their exam after seeing all of the exam questions. These are just some of the ways in which students may cheat, and I'd like to make some suggestions for how we might build exams such that these cheating measures are more difficult. So now we come to the online exam control procedures, and I'm going to go through 9 different procedures that you may employ on a very quick turnaround in order to mitigate some of those online cheating behaviors. Nothing will ever 100% prevent cheating. These are all just ways to help mitigate some of that behavior. The first procedure you might adopt is synchronous exams. A synchronous exam is one that's scheduled for a very short time frame, say a few hours or even just a single day. How this works to mitigate cheating is that if all students take the exam at the same time, then students will not be able to collaborate by sequentially taking the exam and sharing answers. That is, one student isn't able to take the exam on Monday, take notes or copy or screenshots of all of the questions on the exam, and then share it with someone who's going to take the exam on Tuesday. If everyone's taking the exam at the same time or in a very short window, then it will be harder for some students to take the exam early and share answers with students taking the exam later. Things to consider if you want to have synchronous exams. You might need to create a second, different makeup exam for students who are unable to attend or complete the exam during the scheduled time. And it might also be difficult for students in different time zones. Let's take a look at how to set up a synchronous exam in PantherLearn. To edit a quiz, click the caret menu and select Edit. To set up restrictions, go to the Restrictions tab. Here, you may choose to hide the exam from users until the exam is open for everyone to take. I also recommend including a due date so it shows up in the student's calendar. To restrict access to the exam, you can restrict the availability by adding a start date. And this says students will not be able to begin the exam until May 5th at 2:30. And then students may have to complete the exam by the end date, which I've set here for May 5th at 4:30. So in this situation, the exam will be due on May 5th at 4:30 p.m. Students may begin taking the exam on May 5th at 2:30 p.m. and all students must complete the exam by May 5th at 4:30 p.m. And I will display this in the calendar. After I save that quiz, now I can see in the Manage Quiz list that this wide open quiz is now due on May 5th. It will be available on the 5th at 2:30 until the 5th at 4:30. The second procedure you might adopt is short review windows. Not posting an electronic key to your Pantherlearn shell that has all of the exam questions and answers is a great idea to help curb student cheating. The other thing that you could do is limit the amount of time students have to review their submissions. So how it works is if students may review their completed exams for only brief periods of time, say 15 minutes or so, then it'll be harder to share with others because they won't have enough time to copy and paste everything that they completed and share that with their classmates. They also can't just simply download a file that then they save to their personal devices and share into the future. One thing to consider when adopting this procedure is that students may not be able to use past exams effectively to study for future exams because of this limitation. Let's see how this works in Pantherlearn. When editing a quiz, simply go to Submission Views. In order to limit the amount of time that a student has to review their submissions, you have to create an additional view. Simply click Add Additional View to do this. Give your additional view a name, create a message that would display to students. You can set a date for when the view will be available. In this case, my exam was due on May 5th at 4:30 p.m., and so students will not be able to review their submissions until after the end date for the exam. To limit the amount of time for which the view is available to students after the quiz, select this box. Then enter the amount of time you'd like. Allow students to see the questions, and then choose from below. Decide if you want them to see the score, class statistics, etc. And then click Save. You will now see your additional view. Select the additional view and click Save and Close. The third procedure you might adopt is randomizing questions and answers. You can shuffle the question order or randomize the answer order for each question. This works because if students try to collaborate, then each student's question sequence and answer order will be different. If I'm a student who's already taken the quiz and I say the answer to question 4 is C, you're going to get a different question 4, and that C answer may be A when you get the quiz, if we've actually shuffled and randomized in this way. Things to consider: if testing over multiple chapters, students may be confused if questions in later chapters appear before earlier chapters. And so you might divide your quiz or your exam into sections to help mitigate this challenge. Also, watch out for all of the above type questions when you're randomizing the answer order. Let's see how to do this in Pantherlearn. On the Properties tab of my quiz, I scroll down to see that there have been 10 questions added to this quiz, 10 multiple choice questions. In order to shuffle the order of these questions, all I have to do is click this box here, Shuffle Questions at the Quiz Level. Now, one student might receive this as question 1, and another student might receive this as question 1, and so forth. When I save that change, I get this icon that signals to me that shuffling is turned on. So that shuffles the sequence of the questions. Now I want to randomize question answers. To do that, click Add Edit Questions, select a question, And then make sure this box is checked to randomize answers for each student. Here I have marked what the correct answer is. Some students will see that as the top answer, some will see it as the third or fourth or second answer. Also over here, we have a preview of what the question would look like to students. And notice I haven't added any enumeration. So there's no 1, 2, 3, 4, A, B, C, D. That also makes it a little bit more challenging for students to collaborate and share their answers with each other. It's a great idea to go ahead and randomize these answers for each student as you're creating the question from the beginning. When you're done, click Save. If you have a question library already created and this quiz is part of that question library, you'll be given the option to randomize the answers in both the quiz and the question library. I'll select both and save. When I'm all done randomizing the answers for all of the questions, I can just go back to Settings and save my quiz. The fourth procedure you might adopt is to create question pools. Here you choose a random selection of 10 questions from a total pool of 20, or maybe you pull 15 questions from a pool of 45, right? So the idea is that you have a pool of questions that's larger than the number of questions that students will actually answer on an exam. And so there, students will not get the same questions. This works to mitigate cheating because if students try to collaborate or share the exam into the future, then the exam will not be the same for everyone. Something to consider here is that it does take time to build up a large question pool from which to draw. Let's take a look at how to create question pools in PantherLearn. When you go to Quizzes in PantherLearn, you're automatically taken to the Manage Quizzes list. Next to Manage Quizzes is a tab called Question Library. In order to get the most out of question pools, it's helpful to have a library of questions. Here's a sample question library that's organized by topic. This is from a philosophy course, and I've organized it based on the contents from each week. So week 1 contains questions about Plato and Russell. Week 2 has 2 different sections, week 3, week 4, week 5, etc. So it's nice to have sections in the question library. There might be chapters, chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. They may be different texts that you've read, etc. But if you have a question library and it's organized into sections based on topic, that really helps building question pools. Back in the Manage Quiz list, I'm going to go to this Start Date quiz. This quiz is empty, and so I'm going to add questions. In this case, I'm going to add a question pool. So I have the choice to add a question type, say a multiple choice question, or I could add a section, but I'm going to add a pool of questions. The question pool title will be Final Exam, and I'm going to browse my question library in order to pull questions from that library into this final exam. So in my question library now, I have all of those sections that have been pulled over that I can draw from. So there's week 1, 2, 3, 4, 8, etc. Because this is a cumulative final exam, I want to click up here and I want to draw from all available questions. And then I'll click Add. So now all of these questions have appeared down below. I have a bank or a pool of 143 questions. For the final exam, they're going to answer 50. Also, I can change the points per question here. If previously they were 10 points for a question, but I want it to be less now or more now, I can change that. I'm going to just say 1 point per question. So now I have a pool titled Final Exam, and it's going to pull 50 questions from an existing library of 143 questions. And I'll click Save. And then I can see these questions here, and I'll go back to Settings. So as I scroll down, now instead of stating the actual question, it just says Random Question. And it's going to be pulling from this final exam pool 50 from 143. The fifth procedure you might adopt is to shorten the exam time. A good rule of thumb is 45 seconds for each objective question. Multiple choice, true, false, things that can be auto-graded. This works to curb cheating because students will not have time to learn complex theories on the fly or look up every single answer while taking the exam. They will have to study in advance and prepare for the exam, and they won't have enough time to look everything up. Things to consider when you shorten the exam time is what you're going to do if some students do not finish all of the questions. How would you handle that? And then also remember to give special access to students with letters of accommodation that require more time on exams. Let's see how to shorten exam time in PantherLearn. When editing a quiz, go to Restrictions and scroll down until you find a section called Timing. Here we have the defaults for PantherLearn. It's a recommended time limit of 120 minutes. When a student takes a quiz with this setting, the student will have unlimited time to complete the quiz. They will never be kicked out. They can leave the quiz and come back in as many times as they like. That might encourage collaboration where maybe you don't want it. In order to create a timed exam, you'll need to click this radial button to enforce a time limit. Here we'll go with a time limit of 120 minutes. The students will have a 5-minute grace period. And then below, the default setting is to allow the student to continue working even after the 120-minute time limit. That's not really a time limit, and so we recommend that you also click Prevent the student from making further changes. That will mean that the student will have exactly 120 minutes with a 5-minute grace period, and if they extend beyond that, they'll be kicked out of the quiz. Right below the time limit section, there is the special access. If you have a student who needs 1.5 time, for instance, to take an exam, you can just click right here, Add Users to Special Access. And in the timing, you can keep no changes, or you can enforce a time limit that is longer. And so now the student gets 180 minutes instead of 120, and you simply scroll down and select the user who needs the extra time. Then you click Add Special Access. So you'll see the time limit is 120 minutes, but there are students who need special access for more time. Save and close. The sixth procedure you might adopt is allowing only one attempt for each exam. This is the default setting in PantherLearn, so you would have to change something to permit multiple attempts. But the one attempt rule may even apply for quote-unquote computer issues. So how this works to curb cheating is students will not be able to see all of the exam questions and then purposefully disconnect from the internet and claim that they've had computer issues, study some more or talk to a friend, and then try to get another attempt to take the rest of the exam later. I'm not arguing that this is a common phenomenon, but it is something that does happen, and it's something that we can prepare for. Something to consider, however, is that it can be very difficult to determine real technology issues, which do happen, from quote-unquote computer issues. But let's look at those attempts in PantherLearn. When you're editing a quiz, you can go to the Assessment tab, scroll down to Attempts, and see that the default is 1. If you would like to allow more attempts, you can always do that here. The seventh procedure that you might consider adopting is a lockdown browser. This lockdown browser may be with or without Respondus Monitor. These are two different things. Lockdown browser is one thing, and then lockdown browser with Respondus Monitor is a second product. How it works to curb cheating: students are unable to exit or return to a quiz, cut and paste content in the quiz, or open other browser windows when you have enabled Lockdown Browser. When you have Respondus Monitor, students will also be recorded using their own personal webcam while taking the exam. I'll talk about some of those settings here in a minute. Some things to consider before using Lockdown Browser is that it is a piece of software that has to be downloaded to the computer that the student is using, and it's not going to work on all devices. For Respondus Monitor, this requires a webcam. We may have some limited seats moving into the future, and sometimes it can feel a little invasive or add anxiety for students taking exams. Let's take a look at Lockdown Browser in PantherLearn. Again, when you go to Assignments, Quizzes in PantherLearn, it automatically takes you to this Manage Quizzes page. To access Lockdown Browser, go to the Lockdown Browser tab. You'll be provided this tutorial, which is great to watch if you're interested. Once you go to Lockdown Browser, you'll see a list of all of the quizzes that you've already created in your course. That means you have to create a quiz first, and then think about adding Lockdown Browser to that quiz. So let's look at this hidden quiz. Currently, Lockdown Browser is not required and Respondus Monitor is not required. You can click the drop-down menu to view the settings for hidden quiz. So the first choice is whether or not you will require Lockdown Browser. So you have to require Lockdown Browser first before you can get access to Respondus Monitor. They go together. You can have Lockdown Browser without Respondus Monitor, but you cannot have Respondus Monitor without Lockdown Browser. So click here to require Respondus Lockdown Browser. You can also choose whether it will be required to view feedback and results. You can add a password if you'd like, and then you can preview some advanced settings. In the advanced settings, you could lock students into the browser until exam is completed. You could allow students to take the exam with an iPad. Students will not be able to use their smartphones for a Lockdown Browser quiz, and to use an iPad, you have to first allow it. Otherwise, it's only desktops and laptops. You could choose to allow specific access to web domains, and you can just enter the website there to allow students to access a certain website during their exam. You could enable a calculator on the toolbar, and you can enable printing from the toolbar if you choose. So those are the settings for Lockdown Browser. We highly recommend that if you're using Lockdown Browser, you give students an opportunity to take a very low stakes or no stakes quiz using Lockdown Browser before requiring it for something like a final exam. Moving on, suppose you want to also enable Respondus Monitor. You click here. You'll get a pop-up about Respondus Monitor. This is a service that we have unlimited at certain times, for instance, under the COVID-19 situation, but it's not clear that we will always have unlimited seats for Respondus Monitor. So it's a good idea to email Faculty Services or PantherLearn if you would like to use Respondus Monitor, because we would like to keep track of how many seats we're using, how many people are using it, how many instructors are interested. So please let us know if you'd like to use Respondus Monitor. Once you've selected Respondus Monitor, you'll get a lot of settings here that you can customize. The first is a webcam check, and you can preview what that would look like for students. The second is additional instructions. You can click Edit Text to see what those instructions are, and you can edit them. So for here, it says during this exam, you shouldn't access other resources or communicate with other people. Stay in your seat, focus on the computer screen. If an interruption occurs, explain what happened by speaking directly into your webcam. Remember that you cannot exit the exam until all questions are completed and submitted for grading. You can just go in here and edit this however you'd like. There's some guidelines and tips. This is what is shown to students before they begin an exam. You can require students to present a photo, and there are some instructions for that, or you could uncheck that box so that students don't have to provide a photo. You could have students show ID, or you can uncheck that box. You could require an environment check where the student uses their webcam and gives a preview. They have to look at their desk and who else is in the room and what their surroundings look like, or you can disable that. You can also preview the facial detection check. This is so that Respondus Monitor will know if another face comes into the webcam that's not your student. Once you've gone through all of those settings, you can also adjust some of the settings for facial detection. There are additional advanced settings which we don't recommend. When you're done, then you click Save and Close. And now I can see this hidden quiz has Lockdown Browser required and it has Respondus Monitor required. If you would like to give a student special access to take the quiz without Lockdown Browser, you can. Go back to Manage Quizzes, go to this quiz that has Respondus Monitor, Edit. In the Restrictions tab, you can allow users special access. And here you can give a user permission to take the quiz without Lockdown Browser. Sometimes this is helpful if a student is using a Chromebook and so Lockdown Browser cannot be installed on it, or if a student is using some accessibility technology to be able to successfully complete their quiz, and that accessibility technology may not be compatible with what you're using in this case. The eighth procedure you might adopt is to update questions frequently. A good rule of thumb is to change 1/3 of the objective questions on each exam every term. That's 1/3 of the multiple choice, true-false sorts of questions that students may easily be able to share with one another within a semester or across semesters. And so this will reduce the number of exams on file with student groups as well, or even things that are available online. Something to consider here, of course, is that writing new, high-quality questions is a lot of work, and it might be difficult to only edit a subset of questions while keeping the learning objectives the same for the entire exam. Let's see how to easily edit or update questions in PantherLearn. When editing a quiz, scroll down to Add Edit Questions. That's what we're trying to do here, Edit Questions. Click here to expand all of the questions. Now I can see each question that's contained in my exam. To edit the question, simply click on it. And here you could retype the question, or you could retype the possible answers. Again, notice here, I have not randomized this question because it's an all of the above question. Something to pay attention to. If you edit a question, it will ask you again whether you want to edit it just in this one quiz or also in the question library. I'd like for this to be saved in the question library, so I'll click Save. Suppose rather than just editing particular questions, you want to add new questions or delete questions. It's very simple to delete a question. You just click on this X here, and it deletes it from the quiz. Very simple. It's also really easy to add new questions. If I go back to the quiz, I can click Add New Question. So there are two ways that you might change the questions in the quiz. One might be to edit the actual question to change some of the wording or some of the possible answers. Another way is to delete some questions and add new questions. Both of those are relatively easy right from the quiz. The ninth and final procedure you might adopt is incorporating written response questions. So in addition to, or as a replacement for, some auto-graded objective questions, adding in those written response questions can be helpful. This works because it requires students to show deeper understanding and analysis of your course concepts, which makes it harder to share the correct answer or collaborate with others. The challenge, of course, is that the grading will be done manually, rather than those auto-graded objective questions. Let's see how to incorporate written response questions in PantherLearn. In the Edit Quiz view, scroll down to Add Edit Questions, because here we're going to add some questions. I'm going to add a new question, and it's going to be a written response question. My question then is a question that's going to require some analysis and some thought on behalf of the students. To enable HTML editor, that just means over here, students will get a box where they can do things like bold and italics, they can change the font, they could add in graphical equations if necessary, etc. Just gives them some more capabilities to check spelling, things like that. You can also right here make a written response question worth more than you might make objective questions. From here too, you can also, instead of just saving the question, you can click this button and click Save and New, and you could create 10 written response questions, but then make that a pool such that students only need to answer the 2 that they're given, so that they are also getting some different questions, even with the written response questions. So now my list of questions includes the pool of 50 questions that's part of the final exam, plus an additional written response question. In summary, it's a great idea to develop an online testing plan that meets your needs. The plan would include 3 different categories. First, you could limit exam time by scheduling your exam for a specific time or day and have the exam close when that time is done. You can limit student access by limiting the amount of time they have to view their submission, limiting the number of attempts they have, limiting that access with a lockdown browser. You can also change the test characteristics by randomizing the question sequence and answer choices and modifying those questions each term. Having a solid plan will help to mitigate student cheating, but it's also important to think about why students cheat. Here's a great quote from Douglas Harrison, where he says, "Pressure and stress are key drivers of cheating behaviors, and students today are experiencing a lot of both. So students who feel connected, supported, and encouraged are less likely to cheat." What a great thought. The more connection and support we provide to students, the less stress they'll feel and the less likely they will be to cheat. You can also think about designing some more authentic assessment, aside from just objective question final exams. An authentic assessment is thought of as engaging and worthy problems or questions of importance, in which students must use knowledge to fashion performances effectively and creatively. The tasks are either replicas of or analogous to the kinds of problems faced by adult citizens and consumers or professionals in the field. This is by Grant Wiggins, who argues for more and more authentic assessment. So how might you move even away from objective online exams and towards something that will replicate a problem faced by our future students? Small changes can make a big impact. So even when traditional exams represent the most appropriate assessment tool, there are ways to enrich authenticity. Consider replacing 6 multiple choice or true and false questions with 2 short answer or written response items. Or simply ask students to record a brief spoken word explanation of their answers to 2 questions and return the recordings after the exam. So there are ways that we can build very small changes into our exam structure to create greater authenticity. From all of the options here, of course, pick and choose. Use only what works for you. And have a plan to build up over time. But most importantly, be sure to keep the student perspective. What does it feel like to be a student taking your exam? How do I get into that student mindset? How do I adopt their perspective and keep that in mind as I'm building in what works for me? And of course, we're here to help. Feel free to email facultyservices@ohiodominican.edu, or you can live chat with us on Microsoft Teams. We're available Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. And you can also check out documentation in the Help Center on PantherLearn for how to adopt your exams to meet some of those procedures we discussed here. Thanks so much. Have a wonderful week. Talk to you soon.